This is Metro Week. Our top story, the ongoing efforts to reduce homelessness in Tucson. We'll hear from a specialist in helping the homeless find shelter and work.
We want to be a part of the solution. Our whole community does. The TPCH really does want to address the homelessness issue. Again, we have many services that we can offer and a lot of prevention especially.
Then our Journalists Roundtable for analysis of the week's top news stories.
I'm Christopher Conover in for Andrea Kelly. The number of homeless people in the Tucson area is declining. That is due in at least part to the work by a wide number of organizations, from the mayor's office to nonprofits and individuals. A look at the progress also reveals the ongoing challenge, including a 10% reduction in the last year in the number of people over the age of 24 who are homeless. That still leaves more than 1,400 on the streets or in temporary shelters. Homelessness among young adults, those between the ages of 18 and 24, is down more than 16% from last year to this year. But the number of homeless teens and children jumped more than 10%. Overall, the Tucson-Pima Collaboration to End Homelessness reports a reduction of more than 100 homeless people from last year to this year. Still, Pima County has more than 1/3 of the state's homeless population, while having just over 1/6 of the state's total population. The numbers have driven Mayor Jonathan Rothschild to push for reducing homelessness, including his goal of eliminating homelessness among military veterans by next year. To continue our discussion about homeless in Pima County and the Tucson area, Kay Wolfstetter with the Primavera Foundation is joining us now in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Looking at the statistics of homeless in Tucson, Pima County, the general southern Arizona area, we saw a little bit of a drop last year, but overall it seems those numbers are fairly steady. Have we reached kind of a stasis point, or can we do more to get more people into more permanent housing?
Oh, most definitely. I think our community still is in great need for more affordable housing and sustainable employment. So jobs are definitely a concern for a lot of the folks that come through our doors. In our shelters specifically, a lot of come with some criminal backgrounds, and we're really looking to our community and challenging our community members to give some second chances for options for folks who do have maybe a felony from maybe 8-10 years ago. So definitely jobs, we need more of them for folks who are coming through. Some are transient, but a lot are actually members of our community every day, but definitely needing more housing for our individuals.
One of the statistics we've talked about is about 35% of the homeless in Arizona live in the Pima County area. What makes Pima County have such a high number compared to the rest of the state?
Well, I think we, again, are super inviting, and again, we want to be a part of the solution. Our whole community does. The TPCH really does want to address the homelessness issue. Again, we have many services that we can offer, and a lot of prevention, especially that just being able to, through our outreach efforts, we are going to where people are at and trying to actually see what their successes can be through all the strengths that they actually do possess, that we can then do a better job in finding housing that is more, suitable for where they're at in their lives.
We were talking before this interview began. You oversee all the housing programs for Primavera, and there are some interesting programs, some that are temporary, some that are permanent. Talk a little bit about some of the different housing available to people who need some help.
Sure. Well, the Primavera Foundation has had a great legacy in our community. We've been around for 31 years. So again, we've always answered the need of the community, and we have a breadth of options for folks. So we, again, as I said earlier, we have a prevention model where, again, folks come in who might need maybe a bus pass, or actually we provide a mailing address for our community members who are homeless. And so we have about 2,000 people who actually use our 702 South 6th Avenue as their mailing address. We also have some shelters We have a family shelter and we have a men's shelter. Again, most people know about those. Then we have transitional housing that we have 5 sites that we own and run through various funding sources, along with some scattered site options. And then we also, again, as I'm wearing today, are really a huge supporter and really trying to end homelessness with our veterans and through our Project Action for Veterans.
Before we get to veterans, I
Sure.
want to touch on one other group, the under 18 group. We saw a bump in the number of kids, and under 18 definitely are kids, who are homeless. First of all, that's technically illegal, but how do we count them? Because they are so hard to count compared to others.
Right. And our point in time day that we actually have early in the year is not a great representation of that. Again, through the McKinney-Vento program through our schools, they have a better understanding of the true numbers. And again, our community relies on that. And again, our family services is well known in the community for serving the youth population. They do focus a lot on the 18 to 24, but have certainly a youth shelter that is always full, unfortunately.
You mentioned the mayor announced an initiative involving many community partners. It's not just the mayor's office doing this, to make the number of homeless veterans in Tucson and Pima County area 0 by the end of the year. Certainly a laudable goal, but is that a realistic goal?
Right. Well, all the partners that are involved in that are intensely passionate and driven by this initiative with 25 cities. The mayor's office has definitely been the spearhead, and we have other leaders in the community through the county, and some of our outreach workers are part of that leadership team and are doing a great job in identifying how we can actually get there with a great strategy. We are, again, our own local VA is doing a great job with outreach as well. But our outreach workers in that continuum is that we're actually going out to the washes. We're really trying to reach out to veterans who have not been served or who have having a hard time with navigating the system. And we're actually going to them to try to create that relationship, to get some data so we can, again, better address and actually house the veterans that are so in need. And the 25 cities, I think, is a veterans focus. However, it's also focusing on the chronically homeless as well.
Are there special issues with veterans as opposed to the rest of the homeless population?
That's a great question. I would say, and based on my experience with the staff that I work with, PTSD is a huge component where it's either not been addressed or the veteran has been too afraid to identify that. Some brain injury issues as well. Again, but the VA is really going out of their way to really try to address all those issues. And again, we're an extension of the arm of the VA to reach out to those veterans that have those concerns. And again, there's other concerns as well. Some have some other mental health concerns, and that's why it becomes a barrier for us to actually get to them sometimes. But again, over time, it's about building that relationship and having their veteran feel comfortable and trusting somebody that is really going to go the extra mile with them.
The other group you mentioned, a smaller group, but families. Obviously different challenges than single people. How do you work with families? You have schools, you have men, women. That's got to be a big challenge.
Yes, most definitely. And again, I'll speak from the Primavera Foundation aspect, in that, again, we have it's called the Greyhound Family Shelter. And we have 17 units there. And we call our resource specialist is not case manager, but we call them a resource specialist. And they work with the whole family, making sure that, again, as the family comes in, making sure that the kids are hooked up with school or daycare, and the adults have the tools that it's going to take to find income, whether it be work or finding their GED, getting them hooked up with that, getting them hooked up with DES for any kind of food stamps or anything like that. So again, it's really the whole family. It's a very holistic and a very comprehensive approach that we use with families.
When most people think of homeless, they think of a single person, maybe you see them walking down the street or something like that. But we also hear the phrase working poor. Is that a big component of the homeless population, people who are trying but just can't get the finances together or whatever the situation is to have permanent housing?
Again, very great question. In my experience, again, through the Primavera Foundation, we find a lot of folks who come to our door have lost their jobs for whatever reason. and are just trying to get back on their feet and are able to find, let's say, a minimum wage job. Now, as singles, it's really hard to find, an affordable apartment today in that range. And then we have some folks who are working 2 jobs, just trying to, again, save and then prepare themselves for the next step, which would be an affordable place. But really, the sustainable wage is huge. Families can't make it on $7.25. Say family of 4. With a 1-income family, it would be very difficult to find a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment to then not only pay the rent, but really to have food on the table and stuff for the kids and whatnot. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Obviously a very complicated issue,
Yes, sir.
a big issue, but we wanted to try and bring a little something of it to our viewers. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Join me next on Arizona Week to hear from a Tucson man who witnessed the 9/11 attack on the Pentagon.
In my mind, the thing that I remember most is this reddish-orange fireball rolling over the top of the Pentagon towards the Potomac River.
We're back with our journalist roundtable. Joining me are Sarah Garrett-Gasson of the Arizona Daily Star, Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel, and Zach Ziegler of Arizona Public Media. Everybody, thanks so much for coming in. Sarah, the mayor has declared that he wants to get the number of homeless vets in Tucson to 0 by the end of the year. Is this a realistic goal?
I don't know if it's a realistic goal in terms of actually being able to say we have X number of homeless veterans and now we're going to have 0 homeless veterans, because it's a replenishing supply, unfortunately. But I think from a PR standpoint and a way to get people to think about it and to be motivated for it, I think saying it's a bold goal, we're going to have 0 by the end of the year, I think that is very effective.
Dylan, you watch city government, cover the city council, the mayor. What do you think? Is it possible to go to 0 homeless veterans?
It would be great if it were possible. I don't know if it is. It's a wonderful aspiration to try and get every last single homeless veteran in Tucson into a home. And we don't have great updated numbers. The last set we got a few months ago, they had made a pretty good progress at finding homes for people. But in addition to the homeless vets, we've had a number of other homeless people, and it's hard to find all of the resources that it would take to find a home for everyone.
Sarah, about 18 months ago, you started a series. You wrote a series on the poor, especially kids, and you were spending time in schools. What changed over time, or has anything changed over time since you've written that and while you were writing that?
Thanks for asking about that. I spent most of a semester at Walter Douglas Elementary School, kind of embedded with them. I said, put me to work. So they had me working in different classrooms. I was able to just sort of be a fly on the wall. And in speaking with kids and being part of the classroom and getting to know teachers, it was really interesting and depressing and kind of encouraging at the same time to understand how poverty affects kids and education and homelessness. I mean, there are a large number of kids who have, if they're not officially homeless, they have very unstable home lives. And actually the definition of being homeless doesn't mean that you're necessarily out on the street. It means that you don't have a stable, secure place night to night to night to where you sleep. So it could be a family kind of couch surfing, going from relative to friend to relative to friend. So, and a lot of kids are in that situation. And so that's the kind of the depressing and the eye-opening part. The encouraging part is that there are educators and teachers and volunteers and kids themselves who really are dedicated to education and to making the best out of a very difficult situation. And I think it's something that we all need to pay more attention to. And it was really heartening as a result of the work I did while writing about Walter Douglas and the Star's Greater Poverty series that we did at that time, that this community really kind of did step up. And I think it's on the radar now. And I think that's one of the reasons that I was proud to be able to be a part of that. But it's not about just saying, here's the information, it's what do we do about that? And so that's why I'm really glad you're talking about homelessness now.
Let me switch gears and let's stay with education. And Sarah, I want to stay with you for a moment. We're going to go to the complete other end of spectrum of education. We were talking about Walter Douglas in elementary school, the University of Arizona. This week, the Star had a big article on questions within the Tucson community, southern Arizona, about President Ann Weaver Hart's leadership. Big article you all wrote this week.
Yeah, and I have to give absolute kudos to Carolina Limo, who is the news reporter who has, for the Star, who has conducted an investigation, did a lot of public records requests, and really dug into it, and I think did a really balanced, accurate job of saying, here, Ann Weaver Hart, president of the university, has been on the job for about 2 years. Her contract was up for renewal, and so we'd been hearing that there were people big donors who were not happy with her performance. And they took the step of writing to the governor, writing to the regents, the board that oversees the university system. And so what Carolina Limo did was really kind of dig into that. And there is evidence that there is some discontent with her leadership style, with how she interacts with donors. There was a feeling that she was being disrespectful to the governor with some budgeting allocations. And so I think it goes beyond just a matter of style and interaction. And what she comes back and says, and her defenders on the Regent say, is, look, she is making really difficult choices and decisions. And anyone who does that is going to be in a position where they're not going to make a lot of friends. That also, however, I think raises the question of, if things had gotten to such a point on the University of Arizona campus that she needed to come in and just clean house or make all these huge changes, what were the regents doing in supporting the past administrations if things had not gone as they should have gone? So I think it's interesting. I think she has a lot of work to do to build bridges, to repair relationships, and we'll see where she goes, because she did get another year from the regents.
Zach, I was going to talk with you about that. The day that article came out, it was certainly all the buzz around campus and around town. Later that day, the Board of Regents voted to extend her contract again.
Added one more year to her deal, which was kind of standard. Everybody who was up for review at that meeting, whether it be the head of ASU, Mr. Crow, or the head of the Board of Regents, they all got their extensions, as well as a new chief financial officer for the University of Arizona. They managed to all kind of add on. You have to wonder if maybe there was anything said behind closed doors, though, that could have addressed this, or if the Board of Regents is happy.
Dylan, what are you hearing out in the community about what the board is thinking and what the community as a whole is thinking?
You know, you really don't see Ann Weaver Hart at a whole lot of community events, and that job is to, you know, have the bully pulpit and advocate for this, you know, one of our biggest institutions in this community, to be out there shaking hands with people, bringing in money. You know, that's certainly the most overriding job, but just to also be a general advocate in the eyes of the community for the university. And she is not out there as nearly as much as her predecessors have been. And then to go and ask for even more money from the U of A Foundation, to basically ask for a raise on the side, is a pretty bold move, I would say.
Let's switch gears. This is all political or has some internal politics, but let's go to outside politics, the Congressional 1 and 2 race, especially Congressional District 1. Dylan, Andy Tobin, the Republican challenger, current House Speaker, he's going to give the GOP address today, or this weekend, not today, immediately following the president's address. This is the first time a challenger this year has been given that privilege, if you will.
Well, they're trying to raise his profile up a little bit, and you know, this is going to be another one of Arizona's congressional races that's going to require a lot of money to you know, spent on both sides, and that's, you know, part of it. Raise his profile, bringing some more money for the GOP side. Zach,
we also heard this week independent voters. The numbers are out. The vote was certified. We officially now have winners of the primaries. The independent numbers were not so strong as some people expected statewide and even here in Pima County.
Yeah, not so strong. at just over 12% total, I believe, and definitely leaning heavily Republican. It was only 3.3% of the possible turnout asked for Democratic ballots, 7.7% asked for Republican ballots. Maybe you could chalk that up, though, to the fact that as far as independent voter turnout, there were a lot more races to vote for on the Republican side. There were, quite a crowded field for governor, for CD1, for CD2, for Secretary of State. Maybe that's why it was a higher turnout, is just more options for voting.
We keep talking about independent voters as being such a major factor in races that the politicians need to swing these people who are in the middle. And we really see in race after race that the independent voters are just as inclined to keep voting for whichever party they tend to lean for. They don't really switch back and forth all that much. And low turnout. I mean, are these really independent thinkers as voters, or are they people who are just not really involved in the process?
And Sarah, they're the biggest voting group by registration, not by participation at this point, but by registration in the state.
And I think a lot of that probably has to do with people just being sick and tired of the political party system in general. I hear from a lot of people who are like just throwing their hands up. I don't want to be affiliated with Republicans, with Democrats. They're just done. And they're changing their registration to independent because it's more of a statement about rejecting the party structure rather than I'm a freewheeling thinker and I'm going to just make my decision on the fly. But to the point about the primary and the Republicans, I don't think we can underestimate or overestimate, whichever estimation, the impact of some really polarizing figures in the Republican primary this time around. We had Tom Horn in the Attorney General's race, and he was extremely controversial. People, I think, were motivated to get him out and clear the way for Mark Brnovich to run against the Democrat Felicia Rodolini, because Tom Horn is a very damaged candidate. And then on the school superintendent side, I think John Huppenthal, the same sort of situation. He had become kind of a damaged candidate, and they were doing the same there.
In CD2 and CD1, our local congressional districts, again, the independents, big numbers. So do the candidates need to go after those independents or just keep their message at home, if you will, politically at home in those, as Dylan, you were saying, they really may not be, and Sarah, you also may not be quite so independent as we think.
Well, yeah, with independents, these people don't want to choose a political party. How likely are they to choose a candidate? They don't turn out in the same numbers as people who are registered with political parties. So I think, the first strategy for either of those candidates is to go after the base and make sure that those people turn out. And they both have some pretty sophisticated operations, especially on the Democratic side, of knowing who is living in which precinct and how many people in each precinct that they need to get out to the polls.
It may not be that usual thing that we always hear with presidential races where you play to the party to start and then you just pull as close as you can to center so that you can win those handful of swing states. Maybe not necessarily the case here, where it'd just be better to motivate the base.
Well, and I think we should also note that if you look at campaign signs and even some of the campaign ads, party is not really part of it. You just see people's names, you see people's messages, but you don't see so-and-so Republican, so-and-so Democrat. It's, I think, more trying to create the brand of the person rather than, oh, you're a Republican, I'm going to vote for you. Because especially within the Republican Party, there are a fair number of people who would identify themselves as Republicans, ideologically, who aren't anywhere near being interested identifying as a Republican.
Although in the race for CD2, we have a relatively new ad against Ron Barber. They're calling him a lapdog, and they have a picture with Nancy Pelosi, and they imply lapdog to the president also. But they don't actually, you're right, ever call him a Democrat. They just put up the two big Democratic figureheads, if you will.
And oddly enough, they threw out a 75% voting with his party number as signs that he's a lapdog. That's actually quite low. Only 7 representatives in the 113th Congress have a lower percentage. than Barbara does.
Let's talk now a little bit about, of course, a political issue again, deportations, and this week, Dylan, you wrote about it in the Sentinel. We had a protest outside of the ICE office this week. We have another sanctuary person and people protesting to get her deportation order dropped.
There's this recent case here in Tucson, and there's also someone who's seeking sanctuary at a church up in the Phoenix area, so that this sort of thing is starting to spread a little bit. And it's each of these cases is fairly complex, and they're all a little bit different, but they all involve people who have lived here for a number of years, who had some sort of minor run-in with law enforcement, getting pulled over for changing lanes improperly, something very minor like that. And when it's discovered that they are not here legally, they end up with a deportation order.
Sarah, it was interesting. The woman who is in sanctuary here in Tucson was told by ICE that she had to check in once a month, and when people presented a letter to ICE on her behalf, asking that her deportation order be dropped, ICE, according to our reporting, said, okay, that's her check-in for the month. So it doesn't seem like they necessarily want to get too far involved in this.
Right, and they've said, she has a statement saying that she's of a low priority, they're not actively seeking her deportation, but that offers no protection. Her name is Rosa, and it's the kind of thing where she needs this deportation case to be closed or to have a stay, which is what happened with Daniel, the gentleman who was in sanctuary at Southside Presbyterian previously. His case was, he was granted a stay, which allowed him to get a work permit, because you need something in your hand. So if you get pulled over for whatever, you can say, yes, I have gone before the court, cases closed, and you can go along your way. Because, the president has said, folks like this in this category, people who've lived here, who've paid taxes, who have no criminal background, they're a low priority, and they should be. And so, yet we have thousands of people who go through the system and get their cases closed, but we have these people who've gone through the system and for whatever reason haven't gotten the paperwork. It's been like 35,000 people, if I'm remembering correctly, in about the past 2 years or so who've had this legal step taken. So they're not citizens, they don't have their green card. It just means that when they interact with law enforcement, they aren't automatically going to get sent to detention and then deported.
As Dylan, you mentioned, we have 3 people who have sought sanctuary, 2 currently in. Daniel, as Sarah mentioned, who was in sanctuary. He was the first one in decades. Are we going to see more of this? Is this a trend?
I'm not going to say it's going to be an overwhelming number of people, but for those people who are facing, and these folks are all facing a deportation order. They've already had a court order that says you need to leave the country, and that's why they're taking these steps of, rather publicly saying, I'm going to seek sanctuary. It's not as if they're trying to hide. They're trying to use the pressure of public opinion to say, please let us stay here. I don't know that it's going to be like it was back in the 1980s with the sanctuary movement with people from Central America. I don't think it's going to reach that level.
Does this become a political football in any way? We have a large group of independent voters out there. Does this become a political football in the next 50, 60 days as we move towards the November election?
I think the only, Raul Grijalva is running for re-election. And he's been very outspoken in support of both Daniel and Rosa, but he doesn't really have a viable opponent at the moment, so I don't think that's going to be coming up.
There are people who are seizing on it, especially on social media. Every time we do one of these stories, it gets picked up and spread around by thousands of people. But whether that will reach the level of being something that candidates need to be discussing, right now it's a couple of people in Arizona. That's not a widespread political problem.
All right, well, thank you all for coming in. We've reached the end of our time. And that is all for this week. For more on these and other stories, including those airing on NPR 89.1, our sister station, go to our website. Next on Arizona Week, an interview with an expert on terrorist threats along the border. Thanks for watching. I'm Christopher Conover.